Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Dr. Dick Schwartz and Duran Young. Thanks for joining us. FAN celebrates its 40th anniversary this year, and we're honored to have the robust support of dozens of schools, nonprofits, corporations, families, and individuals from across the country. We're committed to our vision of an informed and compassionate community, and we'll achieve that vision by presenting fresh ideas that elevate minds, expand hearts, and make the world a better place. We have hundreds of videos of past events archived on our YouTube channel, so be sure to explore and subscribe to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Dr. Dick Schwartz is the creator of Internal Family Systems, a highly effective evidence-based therapeutic model that depathologizes the multipart personality. His IFS Institute offers training for professionals and the public. Formerly an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and later at Northwestern University, he is currently on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. He has published 5 books. I'm not sure if No Bad Parts is number 5 or number 6. He'll tell us in just a minute. And he is a sought-after presenter. Duran Young is a licensed therapist specializing in racial trauma and legacy burdens. Ms. Young contributed an essay to the New York Times bestseller, You Are Your Best Thing, edited by Tarana Burke and Brene Brown, who has spoken for FAN 3 times. It's an incredible book. Ms. Young is a retired military officer. We were just hearing a little bit about it, and I hope to hear a little bit more. And the founder of Black Therapists Rock, a nonprofit organization with a network of over 30,000 mental health professionals committed to reducing the psychological impact of systemic oppression and intergenerational trauma. And now, with no further ado, let's welcome Dick Schwartz and Duran Young to FAN.
Hi, thank you, Lonnie. That lovely intro, and congratulations on 40 years. I'm honored to be a part of your celebration, and always love being with Duran, so I'm looking forward to this. I wanted to mention that this is actually our 40-year anniversary too. 40 years ago is when I started on this journey with IFS. Yeah, so go ahead, Duran.
No, I'm just in awe because, as you may, I think you know this, I just celebrated my 40th birthday last August. So this is very
Remember now.
just amazing to me that anything has been alive as long as I have, you know.
Yeah, well, it's amazing that I'm still alive.
Yeah, so I'm equally excited about this conversation. We got a few questions in from the registration via Zoom, and I'm excited to touch on some of those things, as well as at the end of our segment today, we'll explore a few questions, and then most of the questions will be discussed in the after hours event. I won't be a part of the after hours event. I have to apologize up front for not being able to be there, but it sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm just really excited to jump into this conversation. So I just wanted to start with sharing a little more about my own journey of how I got to all those amazing accomplishments you heard in my bio, as well as how I was introduced to IFS, because I think for me, the reason I've been so passionate about this model is because it's had a very powerful impact in my own personal life. And so I really like to kind of frame the conversation from there. I am a therapist, I'm a leader, I'm a mom. I have many different roles and titles and parts, but really my healing journey is what I'm the most proudest of. And IFS has been a big influence in that journey. So I want to share that as I was approaching my medical retirement from the United States Air Force, I was actually at the 17-year mark when I had my thyroid removed. I had an amazing surgeon, so you can barely tell. But it was a really hard recovery for me because I've always struggled with depression because of my own traumatic childhood experiences. And having an organ that, you know, literally filters your hormones and manages your mood and your sleep and your energy levels, to have something like that removed, it felt like a part of my body, you know, a big part of me was taken out, and then I had to learn how to readjust to life. So I was sent to a program, or I requested to go to a program to work on my trauma, which I had been kind of just shoving under the rug for many years. Like I said, you know, joined the Air Force at 18. At this point, I was 36 years old, living and stationed and in a base in Italy. And really, you know, post-divorce, having a lot of struggles with grief and trying to come to terms with my own trauma. as a therapist. So just to say that humans, therapists are humans, and we also have our own parts. So I got to this place where I was able to work on my parts 3 to 5 days a week in a group format, which I really think was really powerful for me because I got to see other people model this and teach me how to speak for a part, how to hold my parts with compassion. Every part of my experience, all of my trauma, all of my pain, I slowly learned how to have compassion and curiosity, some of the 8 C's that we talk about in IFS. And my experience was so amazing that I wanted more, Black and Brown therapists to be able to take this to their communities, because I feel like it's something that's very culturally relevant as it looks at not only the lived experiences that we have in our bodies, but the intergenerational traumas that we call legacy burdens that we may have taken on from our parents or from the culture. So that's been a lot of Dick and I's work together, talking about cultural trauma and these legacy burdens that all of us are swimming in, that sometimes feel very invisible, but also very present. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about the book. And like I said, we have lots of interesting questions here. But Dick, what would you like to start off with as far as telling people about this model, why you created it 40 years ago, and what kept you in the journey of continuing to do this work?
Yeah, thanks, Duran. Created it isn't exactly the word I would use. I kind of stumbled upon it. The short version is I was a family therapist who really had thought we'd found the Holy Grail and wanted to prove that family therapy worked. And so we tried to do an outcome study with bulimia, actually. And this was back around 1982, I think. And so gathered together 30 bulimic kids and their families and reorganized the families just the way the book said to. And still a bunch of my clients kept binging and purging, much to my frustration. So out of that frustration, I began asking why. And they started talking this language of parts, which was kind of bizarre to me. And at first I got scared. I thought, maybe these kids are sicker than I thought, because they were talking about these parts as if they had a lot of autonomy and they had relationships with each other. And I thought maybe they had multiple personality disorder, until I listened inside myself and, oh my God, I've got them too. And some of mine are quite extreme about food too. And so then I got curious, and long story short, I learned after a lot of trial and error that these parts weren't what they seemed, because initially I made the mistake of assuming they were and got my clients to fight with a critic or try to control the binge, and they were getting worse. But at some point, I learned that it's much better to listen to them. And if you do that, they'll reveal the fact that they're not bad, that there are no bad parts, that all of them have good intentions, actually. And that the idea that people are multiple is actually very helpful, that actually everybody is a multiple personality in that sense, that we all have these fairly autonomous little entities inside of us, little spiritual beings that we're born with, and that have many wonderful resources to share with us and to help us in our life. But trauma, which is a big topic here, and also what's called attachment injuries, which is bad parenting, basically, and other kinds of negative experiences you might have as a child, force them out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be destructive. And maybe were needed at one point in your life when you were a child, but they get frozen in time in those scenes, these parts do. And they often think you're still 5 years old, and that they need to do what they needed to do to protect you when you were 5. And so they keep going like that. And then you start to get very annoyed with them at least, and often hate them and try to get rid of them. And then they get more extreme to even just exist. And so many of us come to therapy in that kind of predicament. And So basic assumption is we all have these parts. They're all valuable, but they're forced out of their naturally valuable states. And they get frozen in time and traumas. And they carry what we call burdens, which definition of which is extreme beliefs and emotions that came into your system during the trauma and attached to these parts, almost like a virus, like the coronavirus, and then drive the way the parts operate thereafter. And so all this was, again, it wasn't that I created any of this. I was learning all this from my clients. And I had the big advantage of, as a family therapist, never having studied psychoanalysis or even other kinds of thinking about internal systems. So I came with beginner's mind. I just had to learn from my clients rather than presuming anything. And this is what I was taught. So that's parts, but actually the biggest discovery of IFS, I think by far, is that in addition to these parts, and when they open space inside, spontaneously, this other person will emerge. And that person has, I think you referred to it earlier, these qualities, these 8 C-word qualities, which include calm, curiosity, confidence, compassion, courage, creativity, clarity, and connectedness. And those are the qualities that characterize what I ultimately came to call the self with a capital S, because when people, and I just stumbled into this discovery by trying to get my client maybe to listen to their critic once I got hip to the fact it's not what it seemed, rather than fight with it. And if I was working with you, Duran, and I said, okay, just see what the critic wants you to know. And you started out curious, but all of a sudden you're furious with the critic. It reminded me of family sessions where I'm having 2 people talk to each other and a third one interferes in the middle of it. And we learned to get that third party to step back in the room out of the line of vision, have a better conversation between the other 2. And so I thought maybe that's happening inside of Duran when she says, I hate my critic. Maybe some other part that hates it, that's polarized, has come in. So I began asking clients, could you get that part of you that's so angry at the critic to just give us a little space or relax back for a few minutes so we can just get to know and maybe help the critic not have to do this? And to my amazement, clients did it. And they'd say, okay, the critic step back. Now, how do you feel toward the angry one step back. Now, how do you feel toward the critic? And it'd be entirely different. I'm just curious about why it calls me names all day, or even I feel sorry for it that it has to do this. Seconds earlier, they hated it. They felt afraid of it. You get those parts to open space, seem to release this other person, these C-word qualities. And I did that with other clients, and it was like the same person would pop out. And not only would have those qualities, but would sort of know how to relate to the part in a way that ultimately healed it. And so when I asked, what part of you is that? Clients would say, that's not a part like these others. That's me, that's myself. So that's the self, and that's the big deal about IFS. And now 40 years later, like I just said, thousands of clients later, thousands of people using this all over the world now, we can safely say that that self is in everybody, can't be damaged, and knows how to heal, and is just beneath the surface of these parts, such that when they open space, it emerges spontaneously. And that, if that becomes widespread, that can change an awful lot of things. And that's my goal. So, yeah. And the only thing I'll add to all of that is, as a systems guy, family therapist, I was looking for patterns and how these parts related. And the big distinction that leaped out immediately was between these parts that other systems call inner children, that are very vulnerable and young, and also give us qualities like playfulness and love and delight at the world and creativity, but are also the most sensitive parts of us, so that when they get hurt, they take on the big burdens of emotional pain or terror or a sense of being worthless and shame. And once they carry those burdens from whatever trauma you experienced, now they have the power to overwhelm us with their feelings and to pull us back into those scenes. And so we don't want anything to do with them. And we try to just move on from the memories of the trauma, not realizing that in doing that, we're locking away the parts of us that still carry not only the memories, but also the beliefs and emotions. So these become exiled inside of us in inner basements. And when you have a bunch of those exiles, other parts have to take on protector roles that some of them they try to manage your life so that nothing triggers those exiles, because it's a big emergency. If something triggers an exile, it's like an explosion of flames of emotion that are going to overwhelm you and make it so you can't function. So we have a bunch of manager protectors whose job is to organize the outside world so nothing touches you really in that deeper way. And maybe they keep you a little distant from people and don't let people get in too close, or they try to make you look perfect so that nobody rejects you, or they try to make you perform at a high level so that you get accolades to counter the worthlessness. So these are some common manager roles. Doesn't always work. You get triggered and exile explodes. So there's another set of parts who immediately go into action to deal with this emergency. And we'll often do it in an impulsive kind of reactive way. And will not care about the collateral damage to your relationships or to your body. They know they just have to get you away from that feeling immediately. They often think you're going to die. So these we call firefighters. So it's a very simple map. Got protectors, protecting exiles and containing exiles. One set of protectors we call managers, the other we call firefighters. So, and we've learned now the folly in trying to get protectors to change until what they protect has been healed. So we go to protectors to honor them for their service, like you said, like the military, and learn about what they protect, and then get permission from them to go to these exiles and then heal them, which entails witnessing what happened to that child, like when you were 5, and just getting a sense of how bad it was, and then having you go in and get that younger version of you out of that time period, and then unloading these extreme beliefs and emotions that it's been carrying for decades. So that's about as quick as I can do an intro.
Yeah, that was really good. That was pretty quick. So I was noticing some of the questions, some of the themes. There were some common themes, and you actually hit on much of that. One person had questions about how to know if it's a manager part or a firefighter part. And from someone who has a lot of lived experience, if you're familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences or ACEs research, I have a 9 out of 10 in all of the traumas that, are pretty much destined to kill you, that are really, toxic to your body, to your nervous system. And one thing I can say about parts is, when we're able to feel into our system, we can feel them. We can feel how hard they're working oftentimes and how hard they've worked for years to try to protect us and keep us safe or, surviving. Really, it's about survival is what our parts, they're trying to scan for fear and control and navigate the fears that we interact with. So for me, I can notice if I'm in a part or a part is blended with me, who I truly am. If I sense that there's some urgency or there's some fear or there's some anxiety. And I saw one of the questions was that somebody said that they feel like they have managers on top of managers. I too felt that way when I first came to IFS, which is why I had to go to an intensive program several days a week. I also learned that, some of these parts are things that I'm going to have to really work with for the rest of my life, because they worked really hard to protect me. For example, if you are a chronic people pleaser, that was something that was how I survived the military, was how I survived my childhood. And it was largely how I survived racism as a Black woman, was to navigate, to scan the scene and to know what people expected of me at all times. And so I take that part to 12-step meetings. That's a negotiation that me and that part have, that we have to continue to learn how to update my system, that I'm not 5 years old anymore. I'm not, in the military anymore, that I have to be more present. My body and my system needs to update to where I am today. And that's kind of how we help these parts grow up or slowly integrate and understand who we are, because they don't see an adult who cares about them. That's the definition of trauma, is that we were alone with these overwhelming and really big emotions. A healthy childhood would be that we have someone there to process it with us, to comfort us if we're in pain, and to help us understand what's happening. But for many of us, we were very confused about our homes or our culture or just our environment. And these parts took on roles to keep us surviving those environments. So that's kind of the way that I explain it from my lived experience, and the questions that people had around how do we use IFS with children, or how do we use IFS kind of with childhood trauma. Some people asked about sexual trauma, all forms of trauma. I believe that, they really benefit from us being able to separate what is truly the authentic version of ourselves and what is just something, not just something, but something that helped save our lives when we were in a really, really painful part of our life. And how can we get that part to see who we are now and where we are now, to get that update. So for me, I'm also a mom, like I said, and I've actually been able to use this model to help my son with any potential intergenerational trauma, because I have a lot of trauma that was, flown down, was given to me, passed down through the lineage and also through the culture as a Black woman and growing up in a Black family in the South. There were beliefs and thoughts and mannerisms and even just sensations in my body. When I land in Texas, it's very familiar to my nervous system of what I need to be afraid of. I need to be aware, if there's a KKK rally, I need to be aware that everyone, there's a lot more people carrying weapons. There's just things that my body knows from being born and raised there. And so I can be with those parts instead of allowing them to run the whole show, if you will, instead of this little inner wounded child making all the decisions for this big grown-up. I can let them know that I'm an adult, I can be aware, I can handle it now. And I know that they had to do that by themselves because there was no one there. But now I can let them know how old I really am and what all the resources and support that I have. So it's all about really being with. And I heard someone say, something about, I don't remember, managing the managers. And I thought of a quote someone recently told me, that there's a fine line between care and control. So really, I've had to learn how to provide care to these parts of me. Someone else asked a question about how do we love ourselves? It's really the self-loving these parts. Right. Is what I've learned, that if there's no bad parts inside of me, I have to be able to really believe that. I have to have confidence that all of my parts have a good role, they have good intentions, and I can be able to provide care and concern or curiosity for them, versus allowing them to control me or me feeling like I have to control them, that power struggle that happens inside of many of us. Dick, would you like to add anything about that?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is, I know there are a lot of parents watching this, and I was thinking maybe we could do a role play.
Okay.
Where you describe a situation with your son that you might come to me for, and I could show more directly how it would work with that.
Yes, I think I have a part.
Okay.
And then for the folks who are watching at home, I, been doing this now for 5 years, so I can acknowledge that even in parenting, I have a lot of parts. And I can see them, but of course, I can't always be with them in the present time when they're up, and I can't always control them. Again, they kind of have a very powerful force behind them. So I just wanted to add that little caveat that being able to say this is a part is part of progression in the IFS model. We may very much feel like this is me, this is who I am, this is really, me. And so I'm able to have some space with most of my parts. So I just wanted to share that insight. Yeah,
So
I have a
do you
part.
want to do that, or we don't need to, but
No, I would love to do that. Actually, I have this part of me, the part of me that went to 12-step meetings really was because I was afraid that I was passing that down to my son. And I read, I read and study a lot about racial trauma, intergenerational trauma. And what I see is that a lot of people of color and marginalized people, they take on this people pleasing, even with our children, in order to try to protect them from all of the pain in the world. And oftentimes it's because, for me, I'm afraid of it. When I'm afraid of what is it going to be like for him to drive when he becomes a teenager. And the police are probably going to see him as a threat or a target or just another dangerous Black man or Black young man. So I have that part that's always concerned about that. And so I feel like I need to overly nurture him or overly be there with him. And also because I'm a divorced mom, I always feel like, he's already having to navigate 2 households. I want to caretake. That's what it really, and that's because that's such a big part of how I navigated my own trauma. It's like a way that I'm trying to protect him from trauma, even though I know it doesn't work. I know it's not, logical. But just this codependent part that I do feel like he's learned, he's taken it on a little. And I see him doing it with his friends, really not setting boundaries or allowing people to take advantage of him. And so it's now a part that I'm trying to manage of his, like my codependent part is trying to manage his codependent part. If any other moms or parents can relate to this. And it's hard not to do that when he's my only child and it's just me and him in the home when he's with me. And because he goes back and forth with his dad and I, those transitions can be really, tricky. So yeah, I think this codependent part of me that wants to manage his codependent part might be a good thing to work on.
okay. So go ahead and focus on it, however you experience it, and see if there's a place in your body that you find it.
Yeah, it's like 2 places actually. There's a heaviness in my heart. It feels like a lump, like a rock or a piece of coal or like something really heavy that weighs me down. But I can also feel it in my gut, like this really tightness and tension, like a lot of energy in my gut as well.
Does it feel like we should start in one of those 2 places more than the other, or just focus on both of them?
Yeah, it feels like the part that's in my heart spoke up first. Like I felt that first, and it just continued to show me how heavy it is. It's really pulling. And the gut part is I'm just here. It's just always there. If that makes sense. There's no dynamic movement.
So go ahead and focus on the one in the heart and tell me how you feel toward it as you notice it there and notice its heaviness.
I just realized another part that came up on my shoulders actually that judges this part that's in my heart. Yeah, it's I just wish it wasn't there. That's what this part is saying.
So maybe let that one know we can understand why, but if we want to help this one in your heart, maybe not do this. And so it would help us if the one who judges it could give us a little break and relax back. So just see if it's willing to do that.
This is the part that I'm very familiar with. Is my acupuncturist calls it the weight of the world point, like this energy right here that's always tight. And so I told that part. It makes, my son is part of the world. So it feels like, oh yeah, that belongs to me too, because I take care of the whole world. And I'm telling that part that's not even possible all the time. I have to remind that part.
Right.
That's what it had to do when we were little. It had to know everything and have all the answers all the time and control, the environment and scan for risk and know the outcomes. But I always remind that part, you can take a break, I can take it from here.
Yeah, so maybe thank it for all that service and see if it is willing to relax back.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And then return to your heart and tell me how you feel toward it now. To that weight in your heart.
I think that part just wanted to be seen and noticed. It's a part that, this part really prevents me from seeing because it is heavy. And
Yeah.
I'm feeling compassion. I'm getting some clarity around what it wants me to know.
Good. Let's
that-
just
Yeah.
let's stay with that. Just see what it does want you to know.
It's telling me to stop pretending that raising Black children isn't heartbreaking.
Okay. And how do you feel toward it as you hear that?
It's hard to hear because, of course, I know, but I don't want to be reminded of it. This
Yeah.
part, I don't want to be reminded.
So again,
We don't want to.
we really appreciate the space that part is giving us.
I do. Yes.
Because to heal this part or to help the heavy one, we just need to be with it more. So just see if you can keep extending compassion to it.
I think this part feels like I'm gonna rush it, or that this part is gonna, like there's just not.
Yeah.
There's just not enough time. Not here, not now. It's kind of what she's saying.
Okay.
She wants me to know, like this is what you need to know, and don't pretend like this isn't a real thing. That's the saying.
Well, she's got a point around the time issue.
Yeah.
So just ask
Mhm.
if she wants you to follow up and really spend a good chunk of time with her.
Yeah, actually, both of these parts are saying, can you note to self, come back, because we need you.
Okay.
You don't ever, this part really keeps me from working with, the hard and heavy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'll need to keep working with it to see that you can handle it.
Right.
Actually, before we shift out, go back to the one in your shoulder and just ask it how old it thinks you are.
6 years old, first grade.
Yeah.
We had to walk ourselves to school through the projects,
Yeah.
cross this busy road.
So let it know that it really needed to do this. It couldn't afford to let you feel much back then.
Mm.
And we get that. But you're older than that now, and you can handle more than you could back then. And just see how it reacts to hearing that.
There's a lot more self-energy there, just a lot of compassion. It was so hard. It was really scary.
Yeah. Let it know you get that. But it did allow you to survive. And now it may not have to work as hard.
Yeah. She said, about time.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I guess so.
So how would it feel to leave it there?
Yeah.
With the promise that you'll follow up with both these parts?
That feels like a really good place to come back to.
That's great. So once again, Duran, I always love working with you, and I really appreciate your being so vulnerable.
Got mascara in my eye. Yeah, thank you.
And it was a really good illustration of how we try to do this, which is like start with one part and then another one will interfere, and then we get to know that one too, and how they're polarized with each other. And like we keep saying, they're all young, they're all stuck in these terrible places, and they don't know you as a leader. So it's really helpful to update them.
Well, they also don't know that there's a grown-up in the room.
That's what I mean, yeah. That's right.
She's still stuck at that. There was an intersection. It was like a liquor store, the school, and this big road in between. And she's just stuck right there at that stop sign, like
I can't
feeling
believe
like,
you had to,
I shouldn't have to do this alone. And she's right.
yeah, she's right. I can't believe you had to do that. Yeah. Yeah. So how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling actually like I've done this, a
Uh-huh.
lot with myself, with my other therapists and the trainings, with you.
Right.
It always just feels really good to get a little more space, in my nervous system to just allow what has happened to exist and be held.
Yeah. So for people who are real new to this, that's how we do it. We ask the client what they want to work on. And in this case, it was this heaviness in your heart. It was this, I forget originally what that was, but, and then the next step is just to have you focus on it, find it in your body, and start to get curious about it. And that often does involve getting other parts to relax back. So you can be curious, and then ultimately you were very compassionate. And just ask these questions of these parts and wait for the answer. Don't think. And people are amazed at what they get a lot of the time, even in 10 minutes. So again, many, many thanks.
Yeah. There's a question that I want to kind of speak to from my own personal experience. Somebody asked, what role do you see psychedelics playing in helping those of us with multiple acute and chronic relational traumas? I would say that person is kind of describing me. My mother was addicted to crack cocaine when I was pretty much from the time I was probably 2 years old until I was in my 20s. So I had a lot of abandonment, trauma, and anxious, avoidant relational style stuff that I had to work through. But I will just say that there's some things that happened before we even had words. Some trauma happens even in the womb. So there are things that I believe we can't really talk ourselves out of, if you will. And I believe that's what psychedelics can be really most helpful with, is these chronic childhood experience, adverse childhood experiences that is living in our DNA, really, the intergenerational traumas and legacy burdens that it may feel normal to you because it's been normalized by either society or your family or your culture. And so I'm actually a psychedelic assisted therapist. That's the only form of clinical work that I do. And IFS has really given me a great roadmap to navigate, trauma and nervous system and unconscious beliefs and burdens, to be able to see what people are presenting with and what's underneath it all, that the medicine actually helps us bring out. So there's many forms of psychedelic assisted therapy. I'm a big proponent of it, for sexual abuse, for intergenerational trauma, and for anything that has been pretty much been normalized and you really struggle with knowing kind of what's real and how do I integrate this unburdening and this updating in a society that's still traumatizing. For example, folks who are marginalized by race, class, or gender, queer people, trans, and anybody in the LGBTQ plus IA community. Anyone who's been stigmatized, aging, someone else brought that up. If you've had any kind of, limitations physically, our society isn't really set up for people like me, even if it's mental health or physical health. There isn't a lot of consideration for that. So we create these parts of us to respond and adapt to the systems that we live in. And this is what our children do when they come to school. For teachers, you can really be a great part of that, of changing those narratives and kind of releasing some of those burdens that our society or our system has been carrying for many, many years, such as racism, classism, gender-based oppression. I know children are doing really well to me at teaching us about the non-binary and, gender expression, the fluid spectrum, if you will, of fluidity around gender and sexuality. I've learned a lot from the younger generation. So I feel like they're updating our whole entire system, if you will, the societal system. and telling us what makes sense. So I would say that's all I would say, I guess, about systemic trauma and IFS and psychedelics and relational trauma as well.
Great.
So
Go ahead.
I think we kind of have our final remarks, Dick. I know people will be able to ask you more questions in the after hours event, even more about the work that we did together tonight. Feel free to ask questions. I won't be there, as I said before, but feel free. I'm happy to have people ask questions about that with Dick. If you had questions about the process or why he did what he did, sometimes there's questions about that from people who happen to be therapists. But this is kind of our last few moments before we open up the audience Q&A, I believe. And so, Dick, I guess we could just wrap up with anything you'd like to say before we transition off into the Q&A or the after hours event.
Okay. Yeah, just again, I want to thank you because we could have talked through that 15 minutes or however long it was, but I don't think people would have really gotten any idea about IFS. And for you to have the courage to be so vulnerable is really, really breathtaking. And also want to say that, again, I know there are a lot of parents listening, and this whole idea of what we call self-led parenting, where you run into or you get triggered by your kids and you immediately notice what's happening and you take that second to get your parts to separate so you can return to those 8 C's and handle whatever is happening with your kid from that place is just a very powerful way to help kids feel very accepted, and despite whatever they're doing that's triggering you, because you will relate to your kid when they act like one of your parts in the way you relate to that part of you. So if you have an attitude about your anger or you're afraid of your anger, then when your kid is angry, you're going to relate to them the way you do that angry part, and so on and so on. So, and actually, Dr. Becky Kennedy, who I think is really fabulous parent educator, I guess you'd call her, is very into IFS now. So I recommend people look up her work. And I know that I think Fan has had her a couple times.
I know there was some book recommendations. I saw Dr. Nadine's book being recommended, which I highly recommended. I have an autographed copy of it at home. Highly recommended. There's two other books that I wanted to, or 3 other books that I wanted to recommend. That was another question that came in before in the registration. And I would say for intergenerational trauma, one of the books that I really have learned so much from is by Russ Mamenicum. He has a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and it really talks really well about racial trauma and how that's being passed down and around is what I call it. And so I think My Grandmother's Hands is one that I would recommend. Also, the book that we brought up in my bio, You Are Your Best Thing, is a vulnerability and shame resilience focus in the Black experience. But I would say it really tells about how racial trauma and intergenerational trauma kind of go hand in hand, and how much shame we live with when we've had either intergenerational trauma or racial trauma. So that book is really good. And then I would recommend You Are the One You've Been Waiting For by Dick Schwartz. Someone asked a question about how to love yourself. And again, for me, it took a lot of work for me to understand that there was no one coming to save me, that, the outside world wasn't as scary as it was when I was a child, and that I was still responding in that way. And I was responding in that way in my relationships. I think relationships is where we really see our parts play out, seeking external power and not being able to be with our own power inside of our own body. And so I would say our children are good mirrors for that. Our, intimate relationships are really good mirrors for that. And really every relationship we have, whether it be with coworkers, our clients, as if you're a therapist, or whoever you're serving, there's going to be some parts that might get played out there. So just be really on the lookout. We call it being a really good parts detector. I've become a really good parts detector in myself, not wanting to point out other people's parts, but really focusing on knowing and understanding and identifying my own parts when they become activated.
Just to piggyback on what you're saying, Duran, the theme of that book, You're the One, is that most all of us come out of our families with these exiles, like we've been talking about, that are desperate for love and are felt hurt by our parents, and we're desperate to get their approval. And so we tend to, and don't know they can get much from us. Like your little manager said, they still think you're 6 years old. So they start scanning around for somebody to take care of them. And they give you this kind of infatuation when you see someone who resembles the person that hurt you in the first place, because they think, okay, if I can get this person to love me, then I can't be that bad. And it can reverse that sense of worthlessness that the part carries. And so you find somebody who resembles one of your parents, and when they like you, you feel ecstatic because it means you're not worthless. But then they don't always like you. And when they don't, then you're back in the worthlessness. And so what we do with couples like that is help each partner do a U-turn in their focus, because most couples come in focused on getting the other one to be that loving person that they thought they needed, and instead help them from self become the primary caretaker of their own exiles, which then allows the partner to be the secondary caretaker, because most of us have that reversed. So that's a lot of what IFS can bring to couples work.
So here I am, like the Glenda the Good Witch. I just appeared and the munchkins are assembling. Thank you for a really fascinating back and forth between the two of you. Duran, a lot of people are very grateful, posting in Q&A that they're very grateful for your vulnerability and for allowing us to observe that process. So thank you so much. We appreciate that for sure. Thank you for coming on tonight. I want to remind folks a couple things. One, tomorrow Dick is going to do a grand rounds event where we're offering CEUs to clinicians. You can go to the FAN website and register for that event. It's at 12 noon from 12 to 1 Central Time. It's free and it's also open to anyone. So even if you're not a clinician, you can come along. Please feel free. Dick will be in conversation with Dr. Nancy Burgoyne from the Family Institute at Northwestern University. So that's thing one. Thing two is that, as we've been mentioning, Dick's brand new book, which is the second edition. Maybe that's a quick question if you want to think about an answer for that, Dick, about what is new in the second edition that people can look forward to. I think the original Introduction to Internal Family Systems, is it 25 years old or 20 years old at this point right now? I forget what they told me.
I don't even know.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the update as well. But that book is for sale as of today, March 7th. We've been putting in links in chat about how to get a copy, buy a copy from our bookseller, and then come hang out at after hours. Come ask your questions of Dick. There's a lot of great questions in Q&A. I know a lot of folks have a lot of different angles that they're looking at this from. So we'd love to have you people attending, have you come and hang out with us. So it's 7:50 right now. I'll pose some of these questions from the attendees for the next 10 minutes. We'll close out here at 8. We give Dick a 5-minute break, and then we'll be starting after hours at about 8:05, just so that people have a sense as to how we're going to shape the next several minutes. I'm going to do one thing, which is I'll start with, and I won't bore anyone with my opinions about upvoting, but we'll go with the most upvoted question, which is, do you need a therapist to, quote, unburden an exile, or is it something you can do on your own? That's question number one. Dick, if you'd like to address that.
Yeah, so I need a therapist. I can only do a certain amount on my own. On the other hand, there are people, I don't know if you're one, Duran, but there are people who can do an amazing amount on their own. I've been really impressed. And so it just varies enormously. But I know for myself, if I'm going to go to those really vulnerable places, I need some, it doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist. Like I've done some work with my wife. Duran did a session with me at one point. But I need somebody there to kind of hold my hand because it's really scary for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a step in the unburdening process called witnessing, and it's really difficult to witness yourself. You know, that's one of the reasons I go to 12-step meetings, is to get these parts, you know, out and seen and heard and valued and held, not just within myself, but with others. I also, you know, I'm a big fan of communal healing. So Black Therapists Rock has a network of 30,000 Black mental health professionals. We do a lot of work around communal healing and coming together and just witnessing each other's parts. And being with those parts together, collective parts that might, you know, have a lot of similarities around how they experience this pain. And I think as much witnessing as we can get. When we were alone, that's, you know, by definition, the trauma was overwhelming. But when we're held in community or with others, it's also equally healing. So we, you know, we hurt in relationship and we heal in relationship is what I would say about that.
Thank you. Tara has a question. If there are any aspects of IFS that have changed or that you understand differently now than when you first started 40 years ago, I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes. But how could it not be? But go ahead if you'd like to maybe highlight one or two things in particular, Dick.
Okay, yeah, many things, but I would say one of the main things is I wasn't into trauma back then. I came out of this structural family therapy world where in family therapy, you didn't get into the history. It was all about changing these relationships in the present. And I brought that framework to this inner world so that, you know, if Duran were to go and hold a little exiled girl, I thought that would be fine. That's all we needed to do. But then you come the next session, the little girl is hurting as ever. And so I learned the hard way, basically, but through trial and error, how important it is to go to these parts where they're stuck in the past and how much trauma organizes. So all those ideas I talked about earlier, the burdens and frozen in time, all that came maybe 5 years in, I'd say, maybe not that long, but so that's one of the big ones. What else has changed? I think it took a while to really get that there are no bad parts. You know, I would see that, okay, these critics aren't so bad and they really have good intentions, but what about parts that molested little kids? What about parts that rape somebody? What about murderer parts? And I was fortunate for 5 years, I think it was, I consulted to a treatment center for sex offenders. And I wound up working with a lot of those parts. And lo and behold, it took a while because the person hated these parts so much. But when you got them to open their mind and just get curious, that part also had a story about how it got forced into its role and how it carried the energy of its perpetrator to try and protect from the perpetrator, and so on and so on. So it took a while to really get that there really are no bad parts.
There is a pretty interesting question here in particular that Joanne is saying that she knows that IFS work must be facilitated by a trained therapist, but then she's wondering, can any of these concepts be applied in a more general way in any way in a classroom? And what would that look like? So kind of what's not IFS light. I don't mean to make light of her question, but is there a way that some of this can be extended and translated into, say, a classroom experience?
Yeah, we're trying to bring IFS out of just being a psychotherapy and bring it to many different levels of systems. So there are people bringing it to education, and I think there's a book about that. I can't remember. But we're also bringing it to executive coaching and I do a lot of work with some of the leading social activists in the country. So they do their activism from a different place, not from that righteous part that just polarizes. But yeah, education is definitely a target, and just having teachers understand their kids through a parts lens, that this isn't an acting out kid. This is a kid who's suffering. He's got these exiles that are driving this. And so instead of sending him to timeout or something, send him to a place where that kid can get some help with his parts, and then come on back in. But there's a lot of ways to apply it to education. Do you want to add anything, Duran?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I guess I would say, yeah, going back to what I said about being a really good parts detector, it is good to notice your own parts, but I would say when I'm with my son, I notice his parts too as his mother. I guess to me, it's like my managers are responsible for managing his managers for now. And so what I would say for educators is when you see a child, having a lot of emotion, ask yourself what they might be afraid of. That's one of the questions we ask in the unblending process. There's two processes of IFS, is unblending and then unburdening. So we're working towards getting that part for the person to see that part. That's unblending, for me to not feel like that is who I am, for me to actually see that that's a part of who I am. Then there's two entities interacting with each other called a self-to-part relationship. So having a self-to-part relationship as a teacher with a self, extending that relationship to the child's part, and then slowly getting the child to see, oh, I'm afraid of something, or something got activated, or I'm feeling something, or there's this part of me, really getting them to be able to see their own parts so they can have that self-to-part relationship within them as well.
I appreciate that. We're at 7:58. So I guess, Dick, maybe I'll let you close it out. If you, knowing that although there's a lot of therapists watching right now, but you also have a lot of just regular folks like me who only play therapists on TV. I'm not actually one. If you have something that someone can kind of tuck in their pocket as we close out tonight, to remember, in addition to, of course, reading the books, but what do you want them to take home about IFS if this is all completely brand new to them tonight?
Yeah, I think a lot of people talk about how deep pathologizing IFS is, and that both teachers and mental health professionals are very quick to diagnose kids, and that this is an alternative way of understanding all those diagnoses as clusters of protectors usually, and beneath those are these raw exiles, and that we've just had tremendous luck, and kids are very good with it. Kids can access a lot of stuff a lot quicker a lot of the time than adults. So anyway, it's just a very hopeful perspective, because those diagnoses are not that hopeful. And anyway, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Duran, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Enjoy Costa Rica. I'm jealous. I wish I could be hitting that beach in the morning. Enjoy your time away. And Dick, thank you so much as well. And I look forward to seeing you in about 5 minutes at After Hours. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I hope some of you will come tomorrow as well to the Grand Rounds. And thanks for engaging in fan programming.